The heist that started a war. The Xal'Zirian Empire was the most feared force in the galaxy. Their warriors were brutal, their ships unstoppable, and their queen, Phyrexia, was ruthless. Deep within her palace, locked behind layers of security, lay the most sacred relic of her people, the Voidfang blade. Tonight, the human was about to steal it. The mission. Captain Rylan came crouched in the shadows, his breathing steady. The air inside the Xal'Zirian stronghold was thick with heat and the scent of burning incense. Bright green torches lined the towering black walls, casting eerie shadows. The temple guards stood at attention, their reptilian eyes scanning for any intruders. Rylan had been planning this heist for months. The Voidfang blade wasn't just a weapon. It was a key, a source of power, something that could change the balance of the galaxy. If it remained in the Queen's hands, humanity had no chance of survival. A soft beep sounded in his earpiece. "Rylan, you're running out of time," Mara's voice whispered through the communicator. "Security patrols are moving. Get the blade and get out." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Slipping through the shadows, Rylan moved fast. His suit, woven with stealth tech, helped him blend into the darkness. He avoided the guards, dodging between pillars and statues. His eyes locked on the grand altar ahead. And there it was, the Voidfang blade. The weapon rested on a raised stone pedestal, floating in midair, glowing with a faint red light. Its curved black metal shimmered as if it were alive. Rylan had seen weapons before, but nothing like this. He pulled a small device from his belt and activated it. A pulse of energy spread outward, disabling nearby sensors. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. His hands wrapped around the hilt. The second his fingers touched the weapon, the entire temple roared to life. The alarms. A deafening siren shattered the silence. The temple's walls glowed with red warning symbols. Xal'Zirian guards spun around, their energy lances humming to life. Rylan had no time to think. He ripped the blade from its pedestal, feeling a surge of raw power flow through his body. His mind pulsed with strange whispers, voices speaking in an ancient tongue. "No time for that. I've got it. Exiting now." He barked into his earpiece, sprinting toward the nearest escape route. A group of guards charged toward him, their weapons raised. Rylan moved fast, dodging a plasma blast that melted the floor where he had stood. He pulled his pistol and fired. One guard fell. Another stumbled. The rest kept coming. His only way out was the west corridor, where Mara's ship was waiting on the temple's outer landing bay. He ran for it, heart pounding. Suddenly, the temperature in the air dropped. A shadow fell over him. A tall figure stepped into his path, her armored robe flowing like liquid metal. Queen Phyrexia. Face to face with the queen. She stood still, her piercing red eyes locked onto Rylan. Her presence alone made the air feel heavy, as if the entire temple bowed to her will. She wasn't just the ruler of the Xal'Zirian, she was their greatest warrior. "You dare steal from me." Her voice was calm, but laced with venom. Rylan gripped the Voidfang blade tighter. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet felt frozen. Phyrexia lifted a single clawed hand. The air shimmered, then exploded. A wave of telekinetic energy slammed into Rylan, throwing him backward. He crashed into a stone pillar, pain shooting through his back. The blade almost slipped from his grip. She stepped forward, slow and controlled, like a predator closing in. "That blade does not belong to you, human." Rylan pushed himself up, ignoring the pain. He glanced at his wrist device. 10 seconds until Mara's ship arrived. "Yeah? Well, it does now," he shot back, gripping the hilt of the Voidfang blade. For the first time, a flicker of amusement crossed Phyrexia's face. "Fool." She lunged. The escape. Rylan barely dodged her attack. A swipe of her claws sliced through the stone behind him like paper. He rolled and sprinted for the exit. "Mara, I need that pickup, now." Her voice came through. Almost there. Hold on. Guards blocked his path, but Rylan was faster. He used the blade, not to strike, but to absorb energy. The weapon hummed, pulling energy from the temple itself. With a sudden burst of power, Rylan swung the blade. A shockwave blasted the guards away. He didn't stop. He kept running. Ahead, through the massive temple doors, he saw Mara's ship hovering, its engines roaring. Phyrexia was behind him. He could feel her presence, the weight of her rage pressing down on him. At the last moment, just as he reached the ship, she raised her hand. A blast of raw power shot toward him. Boom! The force hit the side of the ship, shaking it violently. Rylan leaped through the open hatch as Mara pulled up. They were airborne. The temple shrank beneath them, disappearing into the storm clouds. But Rylan knew this wasn't over. He looked down at the Voidfang blade in his hands, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Behind him, Mara swore. "Do you have any idea what you just started?" Rylan exhaled, staring at the distant horizon. "Yeah," he muttered. "A war. The hunt begins." The stars stretched endlessly in the void, distant and silent, as Mara's ship, the Iron Hawk, sped away from the Xal'Zirian homeworld. Inside, Captain Rylan Kane sat in the dimly lit cockpit, gripping the stolen Voidfang blade in his hands. Its surface pulsed with a strange energy, as if alive. His fingers tingled from its unnatural power. Across from him, Mara paced angrily, her boots clanking against the metal floor. "I cannot believe you just did that." Rylan smirked, still catching his breath. "Believe it." Mara stopped, rubbing her temples. "Do you have any idea who you just pissed off? Queen Phyrexia doesn't just let things go. She won't stop until she's got your head on a spike." Rylan looked down at the blade, its dark metal reflecting his face. I know. He wasn't an idiot. He had seen the fury in the Queen's eyes before he escaped. He had felt the raw power she unleashed. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a force of nature. And now, she wanted him dead. The Queen's wrath. Deep within her palace, Queen Phyrexia stood motionless in the grand war chamber, her sharp claws tapping against the cold obsidian table before her. Around her, Xal'Zirian warlords knelt, awaiting her command. The stolen blade had been sacred to their people for centuries. It was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of divine rule. And now, a human had taken it. Unacceptable. Her eyes burned with an inner fire as she addressed her warlords. "Find him." Her voice was calm, but her rage boiled beneath it. "I want his scent tracked across every sector. I want his ship burned from the sky. And when you bring him to me..." She paused, her claws tightening into a fist. "I will take back what is mine." A low growl rippled through the chamber as her finest warriors, the Voidstalkers, rose to their feet. The hunt had begun. No safe haven. Rylan and Mara had just reached free space, but there was no time to relax. The Iron Hawk's systems beeped with incoming messages. Warning: multiple Xal'Zirian ships detected. Mara's fingers flew across the controls, pulling up the sensor grid. A fleet of 6 Xal'Zirian warships had already spread across the sector, moving in a wide formation to cut off escape routes. "Damn it," Mara cursed. "They're faster than I thought." Rylan leaned forward. "Can we outfly them?" Mara shot him a dark look. "You stole a relic from an alien queen. They'll hunt us to the edge of the universe. There's nowhere to run." Rylan tightened his grip on the blade. "Then we don't run." Mara exhaled through her teeth. "You want to fight 6 warships. With what? A knife." Rylan grinned. "A very, very special knife." Before Mara could argue, the ship's alarms blared louder. Incoming fire. A barrage of green plasma bolts streaked through the void, barely missing the Iron Hawk. The force of the explosions shook the ship, sending Mara and Rylan stumbling. "Hold on," Mara shouted, yanking the controls. The ship spiraled downward, dodging another blast. Rylan held onto the console as the view outside tilted wildly. They weren't going to last long like this. The chase. Mara pushed the engines to max, darting between asteroid fields and debris clouds, trying to shake their pursuers. But the Xal'Zirian were relentless. The lead warship, a massive black cruiser with glowing red markings, was closing in. "They're too fast," Mara growled. "We need a way to lose them." Rylan's mind raced. There had to be a way. Then he saw it. A planet, just ahead. It was barely habitable, covered in thick jungles and endless storms. But more importantly, it had magnetic storms strong enough to interfere with sensors. "There, take us down." Rylan pointed. Mara's eyes widened. "You're insane." "No choice. Do it." Cursing under her breath, Mara adjusted the thrusters and dove toward the planet. The Xal'Zirian ships followed, crash landing. As they entered the atmosphere, the ship's hull glowed red-hot from the friction. Wind and lightning raged outside, shaking the Iron Hawk violently. The engines screamed in protest as Mara fought to keep the ship from ripping apart. "Hold on. This is gonna be rough." The ship plunged through the storm clouds, streaking toward the jungle-covered surface below. Trees, rivers, and mountains rushed up fast. Boom! The Iron Hawk crashed through the dense canopy, breaking branches and skidding across the muddy ground before slamming into a rocky outcrop. For a moment, there was silence. Sparks flickered from the control panels. Smoke curled in the air. Mara groaned, pushing herself upright. Rylan coughed and shook his head. They were alive, but they weren't safe. The hunters arrive. Outside the wreckage, the jungle hummed with eerie sounds. Distant growls, rustling leaves, unseen creatures lurking in the darkness. Then came something worse. A deep mechanical hum filled the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of landing thrusters. The Xal'Zirian were here. Rylan peered through the cracked viewport. Through the rain and mist, he saw dark figures stepping out of the alien dropships. They weren't regular soldiers. They were Voidstalkers, the Queen's personal assassins. Silent, deadly, unstoppable. Mara pulled a rifle from the weapons locker and tossed another to Rylan. "Hope you're ready to fight," she muttered. Rylan stood, gripping the Voidfang blade tightly. "I was born ready. The blade's secret. The jungle awakens." Rylan Kane's breathing was steady, but his heart pounded like a war drum. Rain lashed down in heavy sheets, turning the dense jungle floor into a swamp of mud and broken branches. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and something else, the scent of blood and war. He crouched behind the wreckage of the Iron Hawk, gripping the Voidfang blade tightly. Its strange dark metal pulsed in his hands, as if it had a life of its own. Mara knelt beside him, her rifle ready, her face grim. "They'll be coming soon," she whispered. Rylan knew she was right. Above them, Xal'Zirian dropships hovered like silent predators, their sleek black hulls blending into the stormy night sky. The Voidstalkers, Queen Virexia's most elite hunters, were already here. He had seen them before. They didn't just kill their targets, they erased them. The jungle was eerily silent. No insects, no birds, no movement. That meant only one thing. The Voidstalkers were close. Rylan gripped his blade tighter. He wasn't afraid of a fight, but something told him this battle would be different. The first strike. Lightning cracked across the sky. In that flash of light, Rylan saw a figure standing in the trees. Tall, armored, eyes glowing like burning coals. A Voidstalker. Before Rylan could react, the hunter moved, vanishing like a shadow. Mara barely had time to yell, "MOV," before something sliced through the air, cutting through the hull of the Iron Hawk like butter. Rylan and Mara rolled away just in time, the ship exploding in a blast of sparks and flames. They had to run. They sprinted through the jungle, weaving between ancient trees and jagged rock formations. Behind them, the Void Stalkers pursued in silence, their movements too fast, too precise. Rylan turned and swung the Voidfang blade, releasing a shockwave of energy. A blue arc cut through the darkness, slicing trees in half. For a brief moment, silence. Then, a deep growl. The smoke cleared, and Rylan saw it. A Void Stalker stood there, unharmed. Rylan's eyes widened. That's impossible. The hunter tilted its head, then charged. The underground ruins. Rylan and Mara ran deeper into the jungle. The terrain shifted beneath their feet, leading them into an area filled with massive stone ruins covered in ancient carvings. Rylan skidded to a halt. His instincts screamed at him. These ruins weren't Xal'Zirian. They were human. Mara looked around, wiping rain from her face. What is this place? Rylan didn't have an answer, but the Voidfang blade in his hand suddenly pulsed, its glow intensifying. He stepped forward, running his hand across one of the carved symbols. It looked familiar, like something out of Earth's ancient history. Then, the ground collapsed beneath them. They fell into darkness. Secrets beneath the surface. When Rylan and Mara hit the ground, they landed in a vast underground chamber, its walls lined with metal structures, old, rusted, but unmistakably human technology. Flickering lights still glowed weakly, and on the far end of the chamber stood a massive sealed door, covered in Earth's military insignia. Rylan slowly stood, his body aching from the fall. Mara groaned beside him, rubbing her head. "Where the hell are we?" she muttered. Rylan took a step toward the door. The Voidfang blade pulsed again. Then, a holographic message flickered to life. An old man in a military uniform appeared, his face worn but determined. "To any surviving humans, if you are seeing this, then you have found one of our last outposts. We built these vaults long before the war, before we lost Earth." Mara's eyes widened. "Wait, Earth is still out there." The hologram continued. "The Voidfang blade is not just a weapon. It is a key to the greatest secret of all." Rylan gripped the blade tightly. "What secret?" he whispered. The hologram's face turned grim. "The weapon that can end the Xal'Zirian forever." The Queen's arrival. Before Rylan could say another word, a deafening explosion shook the underground chamber. The Void Stalkers had found them. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling as Rylan and Mara grabbed their weapons. The sealed door behind them hissed, as if responding to the Voidfang blade's presence. Above them, through the broken ceiling, Queen Phyrexia herself descended, her golden armor gleaming in the dim light. She landed with perfect grace, her glowing red eyes locking onto Rylan. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she spoke, her voice like ice. "You are a fool, human. You do not understand what you hold." Rylan raised the blade. "Then why don't you tell me?" Phyrexia's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Because the only thing you need to know is how you will die." She lunged forward, claws outstretched. Rylan barely had time to raise his blade before she struck. Ambush in the jungle. The Queen's wrath unleashed. Rylan Kane had faced death before, but never like this. The jungle ruins trembled as Queen Phyrexia advanced, her black and gold armor reflecting the dim glow of ancient human technology. Her crimson eyes burned with fury, her energy crackling through the air like a living storm. Behind her, Void Stalkers, silent, lethal assassins, stepped from the shadows, their forms barely visible in the misty half-light. The Queen's voice was low and controlled, but filled with venom. "You stole what is mine." Rylan's grip tightened around the Voidfang blade, feeling the weapon pulse as if responding to the danger. "It never belonged to you." The Queen tilted her head slightly, her predatory gaze locked onto him. Then she moved, faster than Rylan thought possible. Phyrexia struck, her claws sweeping through the air, aimed straight for his throat. He barely dodged, rolling to the side as her claws tore into the stone ruins, shattering them like glass. The impact sent shockwaves through the ground. Mara, still recovering from the fall, raised her rifle and fired. Bright blue energy bolts shot toward the queen. Phyrexia snapped her fingers, and the bolts froze in midair, their energy dissipating like mist. Then, with a flick of her hand, she sent a wave of raw kinetic force slamming into Mara, sending her crashing into a metal pillar. Rylan had no time to react. The queen turned back to him, her lips curling in amusement. Is this all humanity has left? Thieves and cowards. Rylan's jaw clenched. He knew he couldn't beat her in raw power, but he didn't need to. He just needed to survive. And he had a plan. The underground escape. The ruins were more than just ruins. They were an ancient human bunker, and the sealed door behind Rylan was still active. He took a step back, lowering the blade toward the door's control panel. Phyrexia's eyes narrowed. She knew what he was doing. No. She lunged forward, but Rylan struck first. With a single downward slash, he brought the Voidfang blade across the control panel. The bunker's defenses roared to life. Massive steel barriers slammed down, blocking the queen's path. Turrets hidden within the walls activated, spraying energy fire toward the Voidstalkers. The assassins vanished into the shadows, avoiding the blasts, but the distraction was enough. Mara groaned, forcing herself up. Rylan grabbed her by the arm. Move. The bunker door slid open, revealing the dark corridor leading into the unknown. They ran. Behind them, Phyrexia's furious scream echoed through the ruins. The vault of the lost. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The underground chamber stretched on for miles, its walls lined with forgotten Earth technology. Dim emergency lights flickered overhead. Panels along the walls displayed faded warnings in an old human language. Mara limped beside him. Where the hell are we? Rylan didn't know, but the Voidfang blade did. The weapon's glow intensified, reacting to something in the distance. They reached a massive circular vault door at the heart of the chamber. Rylan raised the blade. The symbols on the door shifted, rearranging themselves like a puzzle solving itself. Then, the door opened. Inside, Rylan's breath caught in his throat. An entire fleet of ancient warships rested in the chamber. Not just any warships, human warships. Fully intact, fully operational. Mara let out a stunned laugh. Holy hell. Rylan stepped forward, staring at the insignia of an old Earth fleet, long thought extinct. The Xal'Zirian thought humanity was weak, that they had won the war centuries ago. But now Rylan had proof. Humanity's greatest weapons had never been destroyed. They had been waiting. The betrayal. The moment of awe didn't last. A gun clicked behind them. Rylan turned slowly. Xiphon, a former smuggler and old ally of Mara's, Xiphon had vanished years ago. Now, he stood in the shadows of the vault, a plasma rifle aimed at Rylan's chest. I knew you'd come here eventually, Xiphon said, shaking his head. You always were too curious for your own good. Mara's expression darkened. You sold us out. Xiphon shrugged. The queen made me an offer, one I couldn't refuse. Rylan felt a cold rage settle in his chest. You told her about the vault. Xiphon smirked. And now she's on her way. As if on cue, a deep rumbling filled the chamber. The distant sound of explosions rocked the underground structure. The queen was coming. Xiphon stepped forward. You have two choices, Rylan. Surrender the blade, or die here. Rylan looked at Mara, looked at the fleet of warships behind him. Then he grinned. I choose option 3. He swung the Voidfang blade, releasing a shockwave of energy. The force slammed into Xiphon, knocking him back. Mara fired her rifle, forcing Xiphon to dive for cover. Then Rylan sprinted toward the nearest warship controls. What are you doing? Mara shouted. Rylan's fingers flew across the console. Starting a war. The awakening of the war fleet. Outside the bunker, Queen Phyrexia descended into the ruins, her warriors at her back. She smiled coldly. The fool had run into a dead end. She would tear open that vault and take back what was hers. But then something changed. The ground trembled beneath her feet. A deep mechanical hum filled the air, the sound of engines powering up. The jungle sky above lit up with red and blue lights as ancient warships awakened from their centuries of slumber. The Xal'Zirian warriors looked up in shock, and for the first time in her life, Queen Phyrexia felt fear, escape, and betrayal. The awakening of giants. Deep in the jungle ruins, an ancient war fleet roared back to life. Engines, silent for centuries, now hummed with power. The cold, dead steel of human warships lit up with fiery red and blue glows, casting eerie shadows on the jungle floor. The air was thick with the scent of burning ozone and raw energy. From the temple ruins above, Queen Phyrexia watched in stunned silence. Her warriors, the Void Stalkers, had never hesitated in battle. But now they stood frozen, their reptilian eyes locked onto the massive war machines rising from the underground vault. The Queen's claws flexed. This was not what she had expected. This was something far worse. Inside the vault, Ryland Kane sprinted through the warship's command bridge, his heart pounding. Old, rusted control panels flickered back to life, glowing with ancient human code. His fingers flew over the interface, bypassing security protocols. Mara, breathing hard, slammed her hand on a nearby console. Are we seriously about to fly this thing? Ryland didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the main status display. Prime HFY Sci-Fi, online. Weapon status. STANDBY. CURIUDUCUNT. 2. Unauthorized access DDTCTE. Ryland smirked. Not anymore. He slammed his fist down on the final activation sequence. The ship trembled. The engines roared. Outside, the ground split apart as massive thrusters burst to life, lifting the first warship from the jungle ruins. A century-old battlecruiser rose into the sky, its guns swiveling toward the Xal'Zirian invaders. Mara looked at Ryland. I really hope you know what you're doing. Ryland grinned. I don't, but it's going to be one hell of a show. The Queen strikes back. Phyrexia narrowed her eyes as the ancient warship lifted from the ruins. She raised a clawed hand. Destroy them. The Xal'Zirian warships hovering above the jungle opened fire. Green plasma bolts streaked through the sky, slamming into the rising human ship. The jungle trembled under the force of the battle. Trees erupted into flames, the air filled with the roar of engines and the deafening clash of energy blasts. But the old warship's shields held. A deep metallic voice echoed through the ship's speakers. Primary defense systems online. Returning fire. Mara grabbed Ryland's arm. Tell me this thing has weapons. Ryland hit a switch. Oh, it does. The ship's main guns charged, and then fired. A massive energy cannon erupted, sending a shockwave through the jungle, ripping through the Xal'Zirian fleet. One of the alien warships exploded instantly, its burning wreckage tumbling from the sky. The battle had begun. Xiphon's betrayal. But not everyone was celebrating. Xiphon watched from the shadows, a smirk curling on his lips. The Void Stalkers had failed to capture Ryland, but that didn't mean the Queen had lost. He tapped his communicator. They're making a run for it. You have one shot at this, my Queen. Phyrexia's voice was a cold whisper. Then we take the ship from the inside. Before Ryland could react, a shockwave blasted through the warship's interior. Mara was thrown backward, slamming into the control panel. The air shimmered. And then, the Void Stalkers materialized inside the bridge. Ryland barely had time to lift his blade before 3 assassins struck at once. The fight for control. The first assassin lunged, claws flashing. Ryland twisted, barely avoiding a deadly strike that could have torn him apart. He swung the Void Fang blade in a wide arc. A pulse of blue energy erupted, sending one of the assassins flying. but the other two were faster. One grabbed Ryland's wrist, twisting it painfully. The other drove a plasma dagger toward his ribs. Mara recovered just in time. She grabbed her rifle and fired, the energy bolt slamming into the second Void Stalker's armor, sending it staggering back. Ryland gritted his teeth and used the opening to elbow his attacker in the face, breaking free. The Queen had sent her best, and they weren't going down easily. The Queen's last offer. A voice filled the ship, cold and commanding. Enough. The battle froze. The Void Stalkers stepped back, forming a deadly circle around Ryland and Mara. The air crackled with tension. And then, Queen Phyrexia herself materialized onto the bridge, her body wreathed in energy. Ryland stared at her, chest heaving. She had teleported aboard. Phyrexia took a step forward, her gaze locked onto Ryland. This fight is over. Ryland gripped the Void Fang blade, not while I'm still breathing. Phyrexia smirked. Then let me make you an offer, human. Mara tensed. Don't listen to her, Ryland. But the Queen's words were slow, deliberate. You cannot win this war alone. You know that. Ryland didn't respond. Phyrexia continued, her voice softer now. Give me the blade. Swear loyalty to me, and I will spare what remains of your kind. The words hung in the air. Mara's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Ryland remained still. The Void Fang blade pulsed in his hands, as if sensing his conflict. He could feel the truth in her words. He had awakened a fleet, but what good was a fleet against an empire? Could he really win? Phyrexia extended her hand. Choose, Ryland Kane. The ship trembled as the battle outside raged on. The future of humanity hung in the balance. Ryland took a slow breath and made his choice. The final duel. The Queen's offer stands. The bridge of the ancient warship hummed with tension, the air thick with raw energy. Ryland Kane stood still, gripping the Void Fang blade, its dark metal pulsing with power. Across from him, Queen Phyrexia waited, her crimson eyes burning like dying stars. Her armored robes shimmered with dark energy, and the air around her crackled with restrained power. The Void Stalkers, her elite assassins, stood motionless around the bridge, their reptilian eyes locked onto Ryland, ready to strike the moment he refused her offer. Swear loyalty to me, Phyrexia repeated, her voice a deadly whisper. Give me the blade, and I will let your species survive. The words hung in the air. Mara, still catching her breath from the fight, shook her head. You can't be serious, Ryland. Ryland's eyes flickered to the battle outside. The ancient human warships were holding their own against the Xal'Zirian fleet, but they were outnumbered. This fleet was powerful, but not enough. Not yet. His mind raced. If he handed over the Void Fang blade, the Queen would rule uncontested. Humanity's last hope would be crushed. If he refused, he might never leave this ship alive. He had to outthink her. Ryland exhaled slowly. Then, he made his move. The duel begins. Ryland lunged forward, swinging the Void Fang blade in a sudden deadly arc. Phyrexia was waiting for it. She sidestepped effortlessly, her form a blur of motion. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a pulse of kinetic energy, sending Ryland slamming into a control panel. He gritted his teeth as pain exploded through his ribs. But he had expected that. He needed to keep her focused on him. Phyrexia tilted her head. You disappoint me, Ryland Kane. She lifted a single hand, and the Void Fang blade suddenly felt impossibly heavy in his grip. She was controlling it. A sharp pain shot up Ryland's arm as the blade vibrated, trying to pull away from him. Phyrexia's voice was soft, almost amused. Did you really think you could wield a weapon of the gods? Ryland's vision blurred. He could feel the Void Fang blade rejecting him, bending to the Queen's will. His knees buckled. No, not like this. Ryland's gambit. Ryland gritted his teeth, fighting back against the weight crushing him. And then he realized something. Vyrexia was powerful, but she was still fighting on his terms. The Voidfang blade was bonded to his energy now, even if she tried to pull it away. Which meant he could use it against her. A smirk curled at the edge of Ryland's lips. "You think I can't control it?" he whispered. "Let's see about that." With all his strength, he released his grip on the blade. Instead of falling to the floor, it hovered in midair. Vyrexia's amusement faded. She realized what he had done. By letting go, Ryland had allowed the blade's energy to flow freely, no longer caught between two opposing forces. And the weapon reacted. The Voidfang blade exploded with raw energy, sending out a shockwave that ripped through the bridge. The Voidstalkers were blasted backward. Mara dove behind a console as sparks rained from the ceiling. Vyrexia staggered, caught off guard. Ryland didn't waste the opportunity. He reached out and called the blade back to him. It flew to his grip like lightning finding its mark. Now the fight was even. The dance of blades. Vyrexia let out a slow, measured breath. Then she smiled. "Good." She raised her hands, and from the shadows, a second weapon formed, a jagged black energy sword made of pure plasma. A weapon forged by the Xal'Zirian gods. Ryland didn't hesitate. He attacked first. Their blades clashed, sending ripples of energy across the bridge. The entire warship shuddered from the sheer force of their strikes. Ryland swung low. Vyrexia parried with unnatural precision. She countered with a deadly downward slash, but Ryland twisted, dodging just in time. The fight was faster than human reflexes should allow, but the Voidfang blade was guiding him, pushing his body beyond its limits. The queen struck again, her blade carving through the air, missing his throat by mere inches. But Ryland saw something. She was powerful, but she wasn't invincible. There was a weakness. She was relying on her telekinetic power too much, which meant, if he disrupted it, she'd be vulnerable. Ryland faked a high strike, then suddenly dropped low, aiming for her legs. Vyrexia barely had time to react. Her shield faltered. Ryland swept the Voidfang blade through the air and slashed across her side. The turning point. Vyrexia gasped, staggering backward. For the first time, her own blood spilled onto the floor. A deep silence filled the bridge. Even the Voidstalkers hesitated. Ryland tightened his grip. "Looks like your gods didn't make you untouchable after all." Vyrexia's breath came heavy and uneven. But instead of anger, she laughed. "You are different," she murmured, red blood dripping from her wound. Her eyes locked onto his, filled with something strange. Something like respect. She lifted her blade once more, ready for the final round. But before they could move, the entire ship shook violently. Mara's voice crackled through the comms. "Ryland, we have a problem." The bigger threat. Ryland and Vyrexia both turned to the external display screens. What they saw made their blood run cold. Above the jungle ruins, a new fleet had arrived. Ships unlike anything they had seen before. Massive, angular vessels that glowed with a dark, unnatural light. Alien, unknown. Even Vyrexia stiffened, her expression unreadable. Ryland's heart pounded. Who the hell are they? The comms buzzed with static. Then a voice spoke. A voice neither human nor Xal'Zirian. "We have waited long enough. The war for the blade is over. Now, it belongs to us. Victory or death." The sky burns. The warship shook violently, sending sparks raining from the ceiling as alarms blared across the bridge. Ryland Kane braced himself against a control panel, his fingers still clenched around the Voidfang blade. Across from him, Queen Vyrexia stood frozen, her crimson eyes locked onto the horizon beyond the viewport. The Xal'Zirian Empire's warships, once dominant in the sky, were now scattered and burning, caught completely off guard. Above them, a new fleet had arrived. Not human, not Xal'Zirian, something else. The unknown ships were massive, their hulls shimmering like fractured obsidian, pulsing with an eerie blue-green glow. Their engines made no sound, no heat signature. They moved like shadows across the void. Ryland's heart pounded. Who the hell are they? A cold voice echoed across the comms. Neither human nor Xal'Zirian. We have waited long enough. The war for the blade is over. Now, it belongs to us. An unwanted alliance. For the first time, Phyrexia hesitated. Her claws flexed, her gaze sharp. Even she had no idea who they were. Ryland could see it in her face. This wasn't part of her plan. Mara's voice crackled through the ship's speakers. Ryland, we have incoming. Those things just wiped out 2 Xal'Zirian warships, like they were nothing. Ryland looked at Phyrexia. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, he made a choice. He turned, gripping the Voidfang blade, and tossed it to Phyrexia. The queen's eyes widened as she caught it. The weapon pulsed in her grip, recognizing her as one of its chosen wielders. Ryland cracked a grin. You want the blade? Fine. But you're going to use it against them. Phyrexia stared at him, then at the new enemy ships looming above. Finally, she nodded. An unspoken truce was made. The invasion begins. The sky ripped open as dark energy beams lanced downward, striking the jungle with devastating force. Entire Xal'Zirian outposts were vaporized in an instant. The ground shook as alien drop pods descended, slamming into the war-torn battlefield like meteorites. Then, they emerged. Tall, thin figures, wrapped in dark, living armor, stepped from the wreckage. Their faces were hidden beneath bone-like helmets, their glowing eyes filled with something beyond hatred. Not soldiers. Harvesters. Mara's voice was tense. Ryland, I don't know who these guys are, but they are tearing through everything. We need to leave. Ryland gritted his teeth. No, not this time. He looked at Phyrexia. You ever fought something worse than humans? The queen smiled coldly. No, but today will be the first. With a powerful swipe, she activated the Voidfang blade, sending a wave of blue energy crackling through the air. The battle was on. The last stand. The first wave of harvesters moved fast, too fast. Their elongated limbs twisted unnaturally, their jagged weapons humming with a dark energy unlike anything Ryland had ever seen. The Voidstalkers, trained for centuries in assassination, charged forward, but they were cut down instantly. Their bodies disintegrated on contact with the enemy's weapons. Ryland's stomach turned. They don't just kill, they erase. Phyrexia snarled, stepping forward. Then we erased them first. She swung the Voidfang blade. A shockwave of pure energy tore through the battlefield, cutting down 3 harvesters instantly. But more kept coming. Ryland grabbed a fallen plasma rifle and fired, but the harvesters absorbed the shots, the energy flowing into their armor. They were adapting. Mara's voice came over the comms again. Ryland, whatever you're doing, do it fast. That fleet up there isn't just watching. They're charging up something massive. Ryland glanced up at the sky. The largest harvester ship, a monolithic black pyramid, was glowing with unstable energy. A planet killer. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to wipe the slate clean. The final choice. Phyrexia watched the sky, her expression darkening. She had fought for dominance, for vengeance, for power. But this was annihilation. For the first time, she turned to Ryland, not as an enemy, but as a warrior standing beside her. You have a plan, human. Ryland exhaled. Yeah, but you're not gonna like it. Phyrexia smirked. Then it must be a good one. Mara's voice cut in. Guys, that thing is about to fire. Ryland clenched his fists. He only had one shot at this. He turned to the warship's main console. The ancient human systems were still functional. There was one last command left to give. Override protocol. Self-destruct. Mara's voice cracked. Wait, what? Ryland looked at Phyrexia. We're ramming this ship into that thing's core. For a moment, silence. Then, Phyrexia nodded. Glorious. The last flight. The ancient warship roared forward, its thrusters pushing it toward the colossal Harvester mothership. Rylan took the helm, while Phyrexia stood beside him, gripping the Voidfang blade as if it were part of her very soul. The Harvesters realized too late what was happening. They fired, but the warship's shields held. Mara, piloting the Ironhawk, pulled up alongside. Rylan, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. Rylan smiled. Yeah, but this is the fastest. The Harvester mothership glowed with energy, ready to fire. Rylan turned to Phyrexia. She gripped his forearm. A warrior's farewell. Die well, human. Rylan grinned, not planning on dying today. At the last second, he slammed a switch, teleporting Mara out of the warship. And then, impact. The warship collided with the Harvester mothership's core. A blinding explosion tore across the sky. For a moment, there was nothing. Aftermath. Mara's ship hovered in the wreckage, scanning for survivors. Then, a transmission. A familiar voice crackled through the comms. Told you I wasn't planning to die today. Mara gasped, relief washing over her. Floating amidst the debris, held in the grip of a fading energy shield, was Rylan Kane. And beside him, barely conscious but alive, Queen Phyrexia. Mara sighed, shaking her head. You are unbelievable. Rylan just grinned. The battle was over. But the war was just beginning.